Well, I'd just like to start by thanking Heartland Institute for organizing this wonderful conference and inviting me to speak. And I hope to give you some useful information, and I have some additional information that I could hand out at the end. Basically, I'm going to challenge the notion that fine particulate pollution causes premature deaths and can be used as a justification for the Clean Power Plan. And I outlined major points in my talk in this slide, basically to go after key people that are involved in what I consider pseudoscience. Basically, the Clean Power Plan, according to the EPA, will cut carbon emissions from 2,400 coal-fired power plants by 30%, and will prevent up to 6,600 premature deaths, providing up to $93 billion in climate and public health benefits. NERA Economic Consulting has estimated it will cost up to $500 billion to fully comply with this plan, and there are serious doubts about the health benefits. PM 2.5 is defined in terms of, well, this is the concern about the Clean Power Plan is so great that there are over 2 million public comments were received, including mine. And the EPA's regulatory impact analysis for the Clean Power Plan says avoided premature deaths account for about 98% of the monetized PM 2.5 related co-benefits. And I have a link to my comments to EPA at the bottom. PM 2.5, fine particulate pollution, is defined only by size, less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter, and it has variable chemical composition. It comes mainly from combustion and dust sources. Now, amazingly, China contributes up to 30% in California. The 1997 PM 2.5 NAAQS has been used to establish highly contested multi-billion-dollar regulations, including the 2008 CARB truck and bus regulation and the 2014 Clean Power Plan. To give you an idea what this pollutant represents, current exposure to PM 2.5 means the average American inhales about 1 teaspoon or 5 grams in an 80-year lifespan. This amounts to what's contained in a small bag of sugar that you pour into your coffee. It's totally implausible that 1 teaspoon of invisible particles inhaled over a period of 30,000 hours causes premature deaths, particularly when no causal mechanism for these deaths has been established. The evidence for PM 2.5 premature deaths is based on secret science, beginning with the 1993 Harvard six-city study by Dockery and Pope and the 1995 American Cancer Society Cancer Prevention Study by Pope and Toon. Attempts to get underlying secret science data have been made for 20 years on these studies and been unsuccessful. The EPA regulations are based largely on an assumed $10 million value of statistical life for each PM 2.5 premature death. And without these deaths, EPA regulations are not justified on a health basis. Serious ongoing problems with PM 2.5 epidemiology have not been properly addressed, and they continue to be ignored. They include the ecological fallacy, confounding variables including other pollutants, secret unverifiable data, variable composition of PM 2.5, geographic variation in PM 2.5 mortality risk, temporal variation in PM 2.5 mortality risk, with the risk apparently declining and being fairly minimal in recent years, and no causal mechanism. To give you an idea of geographic variation, there's a 2000 Health Effects Institute report, Figure 21, which shows PM2 mortality risk in the 1980s across the country, shows that it's relatively high in the Rust Belt and minimal in California. This is 15 years ago. Subsequently, I've done research. I published a paper in 2005. I have another one ready this year on cohorts that show no risk in California. This is supplemented now by 10 different analyses and 6 cohorts that I've summarized on this page, including analyses of the people that are promoters of PM2.5 premature deaths. But the regulations are strongest in California on PM2.5. It makes no sense. This is one example of how you try to put together evidence from different publications and combining results from 3 different follow-up periods of the cancer prevention study to cohort. You see that the relationship has gotten weaker over time. There was a 5% effect in the 1980s, a 2% effect in the 1990s, and a 1% effect in 2000. This is the last year that was analyzed, at least by methodology that's consistent over these 3 papers. Because of the frustration and getting at the underlying data and the fact that the investigators won't address the continuing problems that I just enumerated, the House Science Committee first attempted by writing repeated letters during 2011 to 2013 to get the underlying data. It failed, and on August 1st of 2013, they issued a subpoena to EPA for the data in the Harvard and American Cancer Society studies. And it was for 7 specific papers that have played a prominent role in the EPA regulations that are related to PM2.5 and ozone. After the American Cancer Society and Harvard failed to provide the subpoenaed data, the Secret Science Reform Act was formulated and passed in the House both last November and March 18th of this year. It passed the Senate Environment Committee on April 28th and is supposed to come before the full Senate sometime this year. Basically, the bill will, quote, prohibit the Environmental Protection Agency from proposing, finalizing, and disseminating regulations or assessments based on science that is not transparent or reproducible. I don't like to do this, but you have to. You have to go at the individual scientists. They're responsible for what's happened here over the last 20-some years. The first is a person that I've tried to deal with repeatedly during the last decade. BYU economics professor Cleve Arden Pope III, the self-proclaimed, quote, world's leading expert on the effects of air pollution on health, unquote. For the past decade, he has repeatedly evaded my evidence that there are no PM2.5 deaths in California, and he's failed to respond to my detailed 2013 evidence that he's engaged in scientific misconduct. This is extremely detailed and irrefutable evidence, but these people just, like him, just simply ignore. Second is a newcomer to this area. Syracuse University engineering professor Charles T. Driscoll, who published a May 4th, 2015 Nature climate change paper that made false claim that the carbon standards to curb global climate change can also provide immediate and local and regional health benefits. Driscoll's not an expert in epidemiology or statistics, and he's allowed the co-authors, Jonathan Levy and Joel Schwartz, to exaggerate PM2.5 mortality risk. Levy and Schwartz were involved with the exaggerated death claims in the now discredited 2008 CARB TRAN report in California. Third, and maybe most important, are the American Cancer Society officials, Otis Brawley, Susan Gapster, Michael Toon, and Alpa Patel, who possess almost all of the secret science data. They've defied the 2013 House subpoena, refused to release any CPS2 data for independent analysis, and refused to cooperate in any way with qualified Ph.D. level critics like myself, Stan Young, and Matt Briggs. One must wonder why ACS is so intimately involved with EPA air pollution regulations when these regulations have no connection to cancer and are so contested. It's a real mystery why ACS is involved in this. I put at the bottom links to 2 of my requests to the American Cancer Society. On May 29th, they sent an email request to a dozen leading proponents of the PM2.5 premature deaths, including all the named people that I've just discussed. And I asked them to respond to my criticisms either by attending this session or replying to my email. So I must ask, are any of the PM2.5 proponents that I emailed in the audience? Well, getting no acknowledgement, I assume this just amplifies the no response that I got to the emails and my previous attempts. It's very unprofessional behavior on the part of these scientists. Number of interesting developments in the last couple of weeks. May 29th issue of Science contains a misdirected commentary from the Union of Concerned Scientists. It tries to make the case that Congress is attacking science-based regulations by requiring that they be based on transparent and reproducible science. The commentary begins with a sentence, quote, "There is a growing and troubling assault on using credible scientific knowledge in U.S. government regulation that will put science and democracy at risk if unchecked," unquote. Actually, this assault is being led by the scientists who conduct their research in secret and do not allow it to be independently reproduced. This was very telling. Next is maybe an even more telling Lancet editorial by Richard Horton, who wrote these profound words about the current state of science. Just quoting a couple of his sentences, quote, "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analyses, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn toward darkness." This is the editor of one of the world's leading medical journals. Horton's concerns apply directly to PM2.5 epidemiology. Further, the New York Times wrote a June 1st editorial, "Scientists Who Cheat." It states, in a couple of the sentences, quote, "Cheating in scientific and academic papers is a long-standing problem, but it is hard to read recent headlines and not conclude that it has gotten worse. The scientific community clearly needs to build a better safety net. It can start by ensuring that scientists, especially peer reviewers, are allowed to see the underlying data of a paper, which researchers are typically reluctant to share," unquote. This brings up a very troubling part of science that goes back to the 30s and 40s. And It involves a Soviet plant geneticist, Nikolai I, Vavilov, who died in prison for his scientifically correct but politically incorrect views on Soviet crop production. The person responsible for his death was Trofim Lysenko, a dishonest plant geneticist who had the favor of Joseph Stalin, but whose dishonesty set back Soviet agriculture by decades. And I've made an analogy, which I won't go into, between Lysenko pseudoscience and particulate matter pseudoscience. Basically, my conclusions about the Clean Power Plan is it should not be implemented if it's not scientifically and economically justified. It should not be implemented if it doesn't have a measurable impact on global climate change, and it should not be implemented if independent analyses show minimal PM2.5 related co-benefits, which I believe is the case. To better understand this, I have a handout that's been directed to the editor of Science. It's related to a number of the things that I've discussed, and also to the AAAS Board of Directors. They have not responded properly. There was an incredible article, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal last weekend that's called Scientific Fraud and Politics. That's also right on point. And I can hand this out to any of those that are interested after the session's over. And I look forward to answering any questions you have at the end of this session. Thank you very much.